Welcome to the Nerd and Normie Podcast. I'm a big film nerd, Everett.
And I'm Emerald, and I'm engaged to a nerd.
On this week's episode, we will be covering the movie Living, starring Bill Nighy.
And also we will be covering Reality, starring Sydney Sweeney.
For both of these movies, as they are newer releases, we will be doing no spoilers, and then jumping forward into spoilers. Time codes will be down in the description for all of that. Here we go.
From when I was a child, what I wanted was to be a gentleman.
Alright, Living is a 2022 film starring Bill Nighy, directed by Oliver Hermanus, and screenplay is by Kazuo Ishiguro, and is based on Akiru by Akira Kurosawa. This movie follows Bill Nighy as a older gentleman who works as just kind of in a management role as a paper pusher in the public works in London. And basically he's spent the last 50 years or so just moving files around and sending things upstairs and them sending it back, and then he sends it somewhere else, and just really caught up in the bureaucracy of public works and parks and clearing and all these different departments and paperwork that you've got to go through. And then shortly into the film, he discovers that he has a terminal illness, and this leads him on a journey of trying to recapture his life and his excitement and appetite for living.
Yeah. I would say the highlight of this movie is for sure Bill Nighy's acting. I mean, he's so soft-spoken and sweet and just perfect for that part. It's hard to not just be enwrapped in his story, even though it's like really just a slice of life. Nothing super exciting happens, but he's just so cute to watch.
Yeah, I think his performance is the reason to watch this movie. Not that it's a bad movie, otherwise it is very good. But yeah, he's really the standout. There's a reason he was nominated for Best Actor for it at the Oscars. It really is a quiet and introspective performance that has its moments of sadness and happiness and trying to be dignified and all of this stuff. And he plays it all off very, very well. The supporting cast around him, namely Amy Lou Wood, Alex Sharp, and Tom Berkey, are good. There's nothing wrong with them. Particularly, I liked Amy Lou Wood. I thought she was a great kind of counterpart for him throughout the movie. And the other performances, like, there's nothing wrong with them. They're not the focus of this film. Which is where I think this film kind of struggles. Its third act kind of takes some of the focus off Bill Nighy and focuses more on his impact on the characters around him. And they're just less interesting than he was. And so it does sort of slow down and become a little bit, I don't want to say predictable, but like
over explaining everything that's going on and just yeah. So I mean, we can get more into that in the spoiler section. I'll also say this film is made to look a little bit older. It's not full on looking like it's made in the 1950s, but it is set in the 1950s. It is based on a 1950s movie and is very clearly trying to evoke that aesthetic through a lot of it, with some modern filmmaking techniques and stuff mixed in there. So if you are not a fan of that look and want everything to look super polished and clean, this may not be the movie for you as well. Yeah, I think overall the themes and the story here are very strong. Again, Bill Nighy is excellent. It's directed very well. It's written very well. And is definitely worth a watch. Do you? Yeah, I agree. I would say 90% of the movie is so good. And then the last 10% is just eh.
It is a real shame that it kind of falls apart there. at the end for us, but it really, I don't think that's necessarily like a reason to not watch this movie or go into it dreading the ending. It's not like a bad ending. It's just when the start is so strong and your ending is slightly below what you've been seeing this whole time, it can leave you feeling a little less, excited for the film, but it is definitely worth a watch in my opinion.
Yeah, and I do feel like, in my opinion, a lot of movies over the last few years haven't really stuck the landing for their endings, so it could just be us that think that the ending wasn't great, but yeah.
Yeah, I feel like all the time when we're talking about movies and stuff we've watched over the last year and so, it has been a lot of like, oh, this was a really great setup and then kind of fell away. And I don't know if that says something about us or about films in this current era, but it is quite often that we aren't thrilled by the conclusion to a film.
Yeah.
But all right, I think that kind of covers everything.
I think so too.
We are going to move forward into spoilers. All right, so some spoilers for Living. I think the place to start is that end that we talked about. It's that he's finally building to having a confrontation with his son and daughter-in-law, who he has a strained relationship with, to say the least. And he's also trying to get this park for children made in a rough area. Not necessarily like a rough area, but the physical area is rough. It's all flooded with sewage and gross. And he's very strong-minded about this, and then he's about to go make it happen, and then we cut right to his funeral. So we never see that conversation. In fact, it never even ends up happening. We find out we don't see him working for this. We then see his funeral and then hear some characters kind of talking about him, and that's how we fill in the kind of conclusion to the story. And that's where it falls apart. Like, because it's not Bill Nighy explaining himself or having these conversations right on his deathbed or something, it takes him out of the movie and just kind of analyzes his impact, which is an interesting concept. But the characters outside of Amy Lou Wood, I think, are very underdeveloped. And so hearing them have these profound things to say about him and the world is not impactful. In particular, Alex Sharp's character is... He almost, you feel like right at the start of the movie, it's going to be his movie and his evolution of his relationship with Bill Nighy, but it's not. That falls away very quickly, and it starts following Bill Nighy more closely. And then he's kind of, he's there in and out, but it really centers on a night out with Tom Berkey and then his relationship with Amy Lou Wood. And then at the end comes back to Alex Sharp, and I don't know much about him or his relationship. I mean, Bill Nighy's missing for half the movie from work, which is their only connection.
Because it was his first day, was the day that Bill Nighy found out that he was dying and then never went back. So they've only had half a day together.
Yeah, and then Bill Nighy comes back a completely changed man looking for life, and they do have a couple interactions there. And maybe there's something there that we missed because we skipped those times and are only talking about them in reflection, that we missed their relationship developing, but we missed it. So
yeah, and it kind of makes sense in terms of the story for those characters to be undeveloped because of the fact that Bill Nighy doesn't open up around them. Like Amy Lou Wood calls him Mr. Zombie because he's just dead but alive at his desk, doing nothing, not talking to anyone, just sitting and doing paperwork. And so it makes sense for him not to know the people he's worked with for years because he doesn't talk to them. And so, like, that's fine. And I guess, like, the ending would make sense in a way that, like,
you never know who you can impact in your life, but it was just weird to go from focusing so much on his life and his death to being all about these other people. Because even in like the aftermath, when they're all talking about how much he impacted them, it's not really ever Amy Lou Wood who he spends most of the film with. It's just the men who he worked with.
Yeah. And I wonder, like, I have not seen Ikaru, the original Japanese film this is based on. And so I wonder, is that from that movie? Does that movie focus slightly different? Did they try and build up Amy Lou Wood's character or someone else's character, or pair them back, or what changes were made, and if it works better in that or in this? I don't know. Or if they're beholden to certain things that happened in that they didn't want to change. But to me, if you swap Amy Lou Wood in for Alex Sharp and take him out of the movie, not even necessarily like make the first day connection or whatever, but just like her character, knowing him, and then they develop this relationship as he pulls away from work, and then they develop it, they go back, they work together, and then at the end he writes this letter to Alex Sharp that really I think should be to Amy Lou Wood, but for whatever reason she's left her job to go get an assistant manager position, which turns out to not be necessarily the case. They just kind of put her into being a waitress and leave her there, and that's never really developed or explained or anything. It just kind of happens in the background. And so I think because it's sort of trying to split the story, the side characters between those two, if you just melded them into one, don't have her leave the job, have her develop this relationship with him, and then at the end it would make so much sense that he's writing her a letter explaining, like, don't be like me, don't wait until you find out you're dying to live your life, and then maybe she goes and leaves the job to go get something, try something new. But that's not what we see.
I don't know. Yeah, it was really good for most of it, though. I mean, it's very impactful seeing that he did just stand or sit at this desk for, 50 years, only to discover he's dying. He has no relationship with his son. His wife passed away when his son was a baby. His son's wife is literally only taking care of him so that they can take their money. And he just hasn't lived, so he meets this man who's, talking about how he only is living. He doesn't have any meaningful relationships, anything like that. He just wants to get drunk all the time and travel and do all this stuff, and so he spends a night with him, and he realizes that's not the kind of living he wants to do. So then running into his coworker, who's been such a beacon of light in their office and is always so happy and everything, and just wanting to spend time with her, and everyone's like talking about how it's such an inappropriate relationship for them to be hanging out because she's so young, but it's like it never comes across as like pushing that boundary of them being romantic when he's so old and she's so young. It's very good.
Yeah, and another thing I'd like to kind of talk about, at the end of the movie, the three other coworkers are there, and they're very minor characters, just kind of there by necessity of there being more than a couple people in the department. And you don't really get to know much about them, but at the end they're all recounting this experience of seeing Bill Nighy change and become so passionate about pushing this playground through and making sure it happens no matter what.
Because they were guessing whether or not he knew he was dying, and how he must have known he was dying, because why would you try and make this difference unless you were gonna die?
Yeah, and so they make this, like, very profound, we're gonna make a pact today that we're gonna live our lives like this. And then inevitably, of course, minutes later in the movie, probably a couple days later in the film world, you see the guy who takes over for Bill Nighy at the head of the desk being handed something. We're being told this is for you, blah blah blah, and he has a chance to like fight it or whatever, like Bill Nighy was doing at the end, or he can repeat an action we saw Bill Nighy do a couple times at the beginning of take a file and say, oh, it can just sit here, no harm, and hide it in a stack of other files. And that's what he does, and Alex Sharp takes exception to this, but all the other guys are just like, that's just, it's so much easier to not actually do work.
Yeah.
And to just let bureaucracy kill these things. And I liked that, you know, Alex Sharp never took part in the pact. All the other guys say, yes, we swear. And he just kind of stares at them because he knows it's not going to be a real thing. And so I like that dynamic. But again, because I don't really know Alex Sharp or these guys, it's not as impactful as it could be, as if it was Amy Lou Wood seeing them immediately revert back and being like, hey, whoa, this isn't the world I want to be a part of anymore because you guys clearly aren't going to change or something. But yeah.
Yeah.
I think those are all our thoughts on Living. So what would you give this?
The first 2 acts I would give a 9 out of 10. But with the landing not being stuck, it kind of dropped it down to like a 7.5 for me.
Yeah. Very similar. The first 2 acts of the film are fantastic, and I would probably give a 9 out of 10 as well. I'll give it an 8 in the end, because even though, as we've discussed for multiple reasons, it didn't quite land, I still think it's a very interesting movie and brings up some cool talking points, and I liked the production design and the stylized look of it. I love reflections and shooting people through reflections, and they do that a bunch in this movie, so I'm a sucker for that. But yeah, that is Living, and now we are moving on to Reality.
The results have come back. It's never easy, this. Quite.
All right, so my pick for this week was Reality, starring Sydney Sweeney. This was written and directed by Tina Satter. I wouldn't really say it's written particularly by anyone, considering it is word for word based off a recording. But yeah, it follows Reality winner, who was a real person, is a real person. And she worked doing linguist and communication stuff she was in the Air Force originally and then moves to doing it at a different company.
And the company is contracted by the NSA, so it's like top secret information or classified information coming across from the Middle East, and she speaks Farsi, Dari, and Pashto, I believe it was, and so she's translating communications from the Middle East to pass on to intelligence officers and the government.
And yeah, so it starts with her getting home from, I think, the store, and these 2 men come up to her and just explain that they are FBI agents and that they have a warrant to look through her home. And she's just like, okay, like, kind of. And so it's kind of like the whole movie is like, what did she do? Or did she do what she did? Or what they think that she did?
Yeah, it's all the dialogue is directly pulled from the FBI transcript of the interrogation of Reality winner. And so it is very much just a kind of pulled back view. It doesn't, go super hard into her backstory or her inner monologue or who these men, like, it doesn't, there's not that side of things really developed at all. But it does inherently kind of create this mystery because the FBI agents don't want to just like lay out their hand right then and there. So they're slowly revealing information and trying to draw stuff from her and her recollection. And we don't know how much is she hiding, how much is she actually telling the truth. And so it really does work as a piece of drama, even though it is lifted word for word from a transcript.
Yeah. There's not really much we can do without spoilers, but it's I don't know, it's hard to go into without spoiling anything on like whether she did or she didn't do what they think she did, because finding out what she did is a big part of the movie.
Yeah. It is obviously, as we said, like based on a real story word for word. So if you've heard about this case or this situation and stuff, you already know the story and what it kind of asks of the audience. But I guess I'll kind of speak to that aspect, like what was the intention of making this film. And without trying to give too much away, if you don't know what happened, it very much talks about potential whistleblowers and where the government draws the line of what is classified. Whistleblowing is an inherent part of our system here in the US to some extent, and like the media and stuff very much rely on people leaking information. But at the same time, like, there is obviously reasons you would not want sensitive information to just get released to the public every day. So it's that, where does that line fall? And watching this interrogation and hearing her story kind of getting wrapped up in this world really asks some questions about, where do you think the line should be? Are people allowed to leak documents? Is the FBI allowed to just question anyone at any time about it? Where do you what constitutes legal whistleblowing and what constitutes an illegal leak of information? Whether she even did it or not, or how she did it, or who else was involved. All of these things are kind of brought up throughout the interrogation. And so for me, that's the point of the movie, is to recount this story. It does it from a mostly objective lens. It does have a little bit of context at the beginning and the end, which make the filmmaker's stance kind of clear, which we can talk more about in spoilers. But I could definitely see people on either side of the political spectrum watching this movie and feeling justified in their opinion of it and where, their views. It is not one that's shoving one ideology down your throat or the other.
Yeah, I agree. In non-spoilers, I guess we could talk about there's a cute dog and a beautiful cat.
Very cute cat.
Yeah. The FBI agents are weird.
Yeah, it is. I always make fun of movies. I said this to you while we're watching it, like, oh, I guess when I make fun of movies for having unrealistic dialogue, no, they're just more realistic. It just doesn't sound like a movie because, wow, are those guys awkward. And yes, some of it's like they're trying to cover their bases. So if she asks a question, they repeat themselves, or if they ask her something, she says, okay, they go, like, repeat it until she says a firm yes or no on stuff, or keep pressing her on certain things to try and get her into the scenario they want.
But it's very weird to listen to them.
And the actors bring, like, this kind of awkwardness to it. And I would say across the board, the performances are good. I really enjoyed the kind of weird idiosyncrasies of each character and the strange, and it's, this isn't really a spoiler. Sydney Sweeney, the lead, had conversations with the actual reality winner and talked to her a lot to inform her performance and bring it to life. So hopefully it's a faithful adaptation of how she was on that day. And it just, it feels realistic. I could see myself, if I was in these characters' shoes, acting just like all of them do.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, all of them were worried about her animals and wanted to make sure they were okay during this, like, investigation and everything. It was just it was odd to watch, but definitely more realistic, I feel like, than a lot of other cop shows would be with that situation.
For sure. And I mean, yeah, it helps that it's, again, word for word pulled from a transcript, and they'll even, like, in the filmmaking, cut to the transcript for a bit just to remind you that these are, like, the people really did say these, or at least that's what the transcript reads, or plays bits of the actual recording and stuff. So yeah, I really enjoyed this overall and think it's a very interesting film.
Mm-hmm. Me too. So we are going to go into spoilers now. All right, going into spoilers. So, what happened was that reality winner, which this ends up being true, she printed out some documents that are not supposed to be printed or taken out of that office. It's kind of hard to tell exactly what it was, considering the fact that anytime they spoke about it, they would like bleep it out almost, but in a weird way for the filmmaking. They would like glitch her out of the screen and then glitch her back in. But it was, from what I gather, about Russia.
It's the
voting. Yeah.
Yeah, Russia influencing the U.S. election in 2016.
Yeah. So, she printed that out and mailed it to a news source and was caught doing that. We're not really sure if the news source ratted her out or if someone found out that she did it or how that happened. But yeah, she was just tired of where she was in her life, really. Just like, she was working at a job that was playing Fox News all the time, and she was reading all these things that proved that that wasn't accurate, what was being stated. She wanted to be like helping people. She wanted to be speaking Pashto, and she was stuck translating Farsi, and that's not what she wanted to do. And yeah, she just kind of, as the FBI people put it, snapped and made a mistake. But I think, you know, stuff like that is stuff that civilians should know. So it kind of just, it's interesting.
Yeah, and like, as I was kind of alluding to in non-spoilers, it doesn't present it inherently as like all information should be public information, but it also very much is like, if the entirety of public discourse at the time this happened is about whether or not there was Russia was involved in the 2016 election, she then sees an intelligence report saying they were successful in hacking several voting systems or involved in influencing them and may have allegedly distorted some of the voting results. And then she's watching all of this stuff about Fox News all day, trying to disprove that or just saying it's not true. She's like, well, hey, I have the literal report that tells you, according to this intelligence agency, it did happen. So she mails it into a news source claiming that they will keep it anonymous and whatever. And I think the real kicker at the end of the film, it kind of talks a little bit about the logistics of the case and what happened after. She did get arrested. She did serve 3 years in jail for a mishandling of classified documents and illegal release of information because it may have harmed the U.S.'s in terms of what they call it, process and something, which is dangerous to do to foreign adversaries, whatever. But at the same time, within 3 days of her arrest, the government acknowledged that this information should be accessible to the public and released it voluntarily. And yet she still served her 3 years in jail.
And then went to probation and is still on probation.
Yeah. And so it really, it asks those questions about the U.S. legal system and what we do with our whistleblowers and stuff, because information like this is important for the public to know so there can be informed and honest discord about these situations. And yet, obviously, the government doesn't want it revealed that our elections may have been influenced or damaged in some capacity. And so they are trying to cover it up because that makes them look really bad. But yeah, it's all just a mess. And there's even a clip of like a couple reporters talking at the end being like, hey, like, we won't be able to tell people what's happening in the government if people don't leak us documents. And that's an accepted part of this. And there are protections for whistleblowers in the legal system, and they may or may not have been applied in this case. Again, that is up to your interpretation of the law. But yeah, it's a very interesting movie, especially if you're intrigued by current events, or anything with what's going on in politics these days.
Yeah. So, what do you think? What's your score?
I would give this an 8 out of 10. I think it is a very interesting way to make a movie. But it did also kind of leave me a little confused on the intentions for a while, because I couldn't tell who was like a good or a bad guy. And again, it's because there isn't really a good or a bad guy, or someone we're supposed to be fully behind. And the other kind of thing that bothered me about it is, I get they're going word for word from the transcript, and some of those, like the name of the specific article and what happened and stuff, are probably redacted on the actual transcript. But then at the end, it does like say, hey, this is what it was, because it did make it to the public and it then got released. And so we know roughly what this stuff was, that they didn't just say it then, because having just a vague memory of this when it happened, every time it cut away from her, I'm like, well, I want to know what she's actually revealing, because I don't quite remember, and I want to know, like, there is certain information I would say should remain classified and certain information that shouldn't, and because I don't know what it is she's revealed, I can't make an informed decision on whether or not I side with her or the government. And that kind of bothered me, but at the same time, it does kind of resolve that at the end. And I am somewhat interested in politics and learning about more details about these cases, and I think it was very fascinating to pull directly from the FBI transcript, to hear word for word what these people were saying, and honestly gave me a little bit of respect for interrogation techniques, because I could, like, it's always like, oh, why don't you just say you didn't do it the whole time? But they do a good job of getting her to admit to what she did, whether that's good or bad, but
Yeah. So we've discussed this before in previous podcasts, but up until me and Everett got together, I would usually only watch scary movies, and then, like, I don't know, maybe 3 movies a year that were a different category. And I didn't look at what this movie was going to be before I picked it. I just saw Sydney Sweeney was in it, and people on TikTok said it was good. So I picked it. But this kind of, like, true crime or reenacting stuff that's happened, that kind of stuff, isn't really my kind of movie. So for that, I think this one I also will give a 7.5, because it was good and it was well acted. It's just not really my kind of movie.
Yep, so, I think that's fair. All right, that's our thoughts on Reality.
I don't think you're a big bad master spy. I think you just messed up.
All right, thanks for tuning in to our podcast this week. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Nerd and Normie, and we put out new episodes every Monday.
And if you're on YouTube, like and subscribe, or if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, give us a 5-star review. That really helps us out.
Thank you.